A boy walks out of a train station in London. He's 14. He's wearing a black Slipknot t-shirt, black jeans, and he's got a canvas bag slung over one shoulder, covered in patches from rock bands. The CCTV camera catches him for a few seconds, walking, alone, unhurried, and then he steps out of frame, into the crowd on the street outside King's Cross. That is the last confirmed image of Andrew Gosden that exists anywhere on Earth. No sighting since has ever been confirmed, not one, not in 19 years. Here's what makes this case different from almost every other missing child case you've heard of. Andrew wasn't lured. There's no evidence he was groomed online. He barely used the internet at all. He wasn't reported to be struggling at school, or getting bullied, or acting out. By every account his family and his teachers have ever given, he was a quiet, gifted, well-liked kid with a 100% attendance record who was expected to go to Cambridge. And on one ordinary Friday morning, he skipped school, walked to a cash machine, withdrew almost every penny he had, went home while his family was out, changed his clothes, and bought a one-way train ticket to London, when the return ticket would have cost him 50 pence more. He never told anyone where he was going. He never told anyone why. And when police finally tracked him to King's Cross, 3.5 weeks after he vanished, the trail simply stopped. In December 2021, 14 years after Andrew disappeared, police made their first arrests in the case. 2 men. One of them was also connected to a separate investigation into indecent images of children. For a moment, after a decade and a half of nothing, it looked like his family might finally get an answer. I'll tell you exactly what happened with that arrest later in this video, because the outcome is not what you'd expect, and it's not the end of the story. This is the case of Andrew Gosden. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why detectives, journalists, and true crime investigators still can't agree on the most basic question in the whole case. Did Andrew Gosden run away from something, or did someone take him? To understand why this case still doesn't make sense to the people who worked it, you need to understand who Andrew actually was, because almost nothing about his disappearance matches the profile investigators expect. Andrew Paul Gosden was born on the 10th of July 1993 in Doncaster, a former mining and steel town in South Yorkshire, England. He grew up in Balby, a quiet residential suburb south of the city centre, with his mum and dad, Glenys and Kevin, and his older sister Charlotte. His family called him Roo. That nickname is going to matter later, so hold on to it. By every description available, from his parents, his teachers, and the journalists who later profiled the case, Andrew was not a typical teenager in one very specific way. He was exceptionally academically gifted. He was on his school's Young Gifted and Talented program. He'd been invited to a 2-week residential summer school at Lancaster University for high-performing students, and came back from it enthusiastic and energized. He had a perfect attendance record at his school, the Macaulay Catholic High School, and teachers expected him to score straight A's in his GCSEs. He was described as a prize-winning mathematician who seemed destined for Cambridge. But here's the contradiction that runs through this entire case. Academically, Andrew was ahead of almost everyone his age. Socially, he was small for 14. People who met him often guessed he was closer to 12. And he was shy, quiet, and kept to a very small circle of friends. His family described him as a home bird who rarely left the house, and never without telling someone where he was going. He was into video games and metal music, Slipknot in particular, which is what he was wearing the day he vanished. He didn't have a phone. He'd owned a couple as a younger kid, but kept losing them, and when his parents offered to replace one, he told them he'd rather have a new Xbox instead. He didn't have an email address. He didn't have an Xbox Live account or a PSP network account. Digital forensics teams later confirmed this. There was no online trail to follow, because there basically wasn't one to begin with. This matters enormously for the investigation, because in almost every comparable case of a teenager disappearing in this period, police start by pulling phone records and chat logs. With Andrew, there was nothing to pull, no digital footprint at all. Whatever reason he had for getting on that train, he didn't discuss it with anyone, anywhere that left a record. He'd stopped going to Cub Scouts a few months earlier. He'd stopped attending church about 18 months before he vanished, even though his parents were committed Anglican Christians. Though notably, they'd made a point of never baptizing either of their children, because they didn't want to impose their beliefs on them. This was a family, by every account, that gave their kids unusual latitude and trust. The evening before he disappeared was, by his father's own account, completely unremarkable. The family ate dinner together. They did the dishes. Andrew spent an hour doing a jigsaw puzzle on the computer with his dad. Then he watched comedy shows on TV with his mum. Mock the Week, that Mitchell and Webb look. Ordinary. Nothing that, in hindsight, anyone can point to as a warning sign. The next morning, though, the morning of Friday, September 14th, 2007, his dad later said Andrew had trouble waking up and seemed unusually irritable. Small detail, but it's one of the only pieces of behavioral evidence anyone has from that final 24 hours, and his family has turned it over in their minds for nearly 2 decades. Let's walk through this hour by hour, because the sequence of what Andrew did that morning is the single most important piece of evidence in the entire case. This wasn't a spontaneous, panicked decision. This was planned. 8:05 a.m. Andrew leaves the house in his school uniform, blazer and all. A family friend sees him walking across Westfield Park toward his usual bus stop. Completely normal, nothing out of place. But he doesn't get on the bus. Instead, he diverts. He walks to a cash machine and withdraws £200 from his bank account, the maximum the machine would allow him to take out, since it only dispensed cash in £20 increments, and he had £214 total in the account. He is then caught on a neighbor's CCTV camera walking back toward his own house. Think about what that means. He waited until his family had already left for the day, and he went home. At the house, he puts his school uniform in the washing machine. He hangs his blazer on the back of a chair. He changes into black jeans and the Slipknot t-shirt. He packs a canvas satchel covered in band patches. Into it, he puts his wallet, his keys, and his PSP, the handheld game console. But notably, he does not pack the charger for it. He doesn't take a coat, even though it's September. He doesn't take his passport. And here's a detail that has haunted his family for years. He left behind about £100 in cash that he'd been saving from birthday money. If this was about money, if he needed cash for something, why leave £100 sitting in his room? At 8:30 a.m., he leaves the house for the final time. Neighbor's camera picks him up again, walking down Littlemore Lane toward the park. From there, he walks to Doncaster railway station. At the ticket counter, he buys a one-way ticket to London King's Cross. It costs £31.40. The clerk selling it to him, who remembered him specifically years later because of what happened next, tells him that a return ticket costs just 50 pence more. Andrew says no. He wants the single, one way only. This is the detail that true crime communities, journalists, and even the lead investigators have circled back to again and again for almost 2 decades. It is the strongest single piece of evidence that whatever Andrew was doing that day, he did not plan on coming home that night. At 9:35 a.m., he boards the train alone. A woman who sat near him later told police he seemed quiet, completely absorbed in his handheld game, not agitated, not anxious, just a kid playing a video game on a train. Back at school, when Andrew doesn't show up for morning lessons, staff try to call his parents, and due to a clerical mix-up, they actually leave a voicemail with the wrong family entirely, delaying the moment anyone even realizes something might be wrong. At 11:20 a.m., the train pulls into King's Cross. 5 minutes later, at 11:25 a.m., Andrew is caught on the station's CCTV, walking out through the main concourse, alone, unhurried, and out of frame. That's it. That's the last verified trace of Andrew Gosden that exists. That evening, his family sits down for dinner, assuming he's downstairs playing video games or up in his room doing homework, the same routine as every other day. When he doesn't come when they call him, they check the house. He's not there. At first they think maybe he's at a friend's, lost track of time. They start calling around. His friends tell them he wasn't at school that day at all. Around 7 p.m., the police are called. Here's where this case starts to get genuinely frustrating, because the early investigation made errors that Andrew's family believes may have cost them the one real chance to find him quickly. In the first hours, police and family scoured Andrew's route to school, thinking he might have been the victim of an accident or an assault nearby. Nothing. Within 3 hours, a missing person leaflet was already being handed out. South Yorkshire Police asked British Transport Police to review King's Cross CCTV footage within 2 days of Andrew being reported missing. But, and this is the critical failure, BTP couldn't pick him out of the crowd. It wasn't until 3 weeks later, after a South Yorkshire officer was personally sent down to London to review the tapes, that Andrew was finally identified on camera. 27 days. Think about what that means for any physical trail. Any CCTV from buses, from the London Underground, from surrounding streets, all of that footage is typically overwritten and deleted within weeks. By the time investigators knew for certain Andrew had walked out of King's Cross, most of the surrounding camera network that might have shown which direction he went afterward was already gone. Andrew's father, Kevin, has said publicly and repeatedly that he believes this delay was the single most damaging failure in the entire case, because if police had confirmed the King's Cross sighting immediately, they could have pulled surrounding footage before it was lost. Instead, they lost nearly a month. And there's a second controversy that's followed this case for years. In those first days, before the CCTV was found, investigators reportedly focused significant attention on the family itself, specifically on Kevin. He has said in interviews that he felt treated like a suspect, describing what he called unlawful, unrecorded interviews aimed at pressuring him to explain his son's disappearance, while, in his view, more productive leads went unpursued. He and the rest of the family were ultimately fully cleared of any involvement. But the time spent on that line of inquiry is, according to Kevin, time that could have gone toward chasing the trail while it was still warm. Once the CCTV was confirmed, the investigation shifted to the sightings, and there were a lot of them. In the year following Andrew's disappearance, the Times reported that police had logged 122 possible sightings from across Britain, 45 of them in London alone, 11 in Brighton. Not one has ever been confirmed. But some are worth walking through, because Andrew's family themselves consider a handful of them credible. The most significant, according to the family, placed a boy matching Andrew's description at a Pizza Hut on Oxford Street, about an hour's walk from King's Cross, on the very day he disappeared. His family has said this lead was never properly investigated by police. 2 days later, on the 16th of September, there were unconfirmed reports of a boy matching his description, sleeping rough in a park in Southwark. On the 19th of September, 5 days after he vanished, a possible sighting placed him getting off a train at Mortlake Station, out in southwest London, and walking up toward Upper Richmond Road. That same day, reports suggested he'd been seen wearing warmer clothes than what he left home in, which, if true, would mean someone gave him clothing, or he bought some himself. A month later, on the 17th of October, a woman in Covent Garden approached a boy she believed matched Andrew's description from the news. She spoke to him directly. He denied being Andrew Gosden. That detail alone tells you a lot about how the investigation was resourced in those crucial early months. A witness who may have had a face-to-face conversation with Andrew, and it took 6 weeks for anyone in an official capacity to follow up. Further sightings trickled in over the following years: a park in Streatham, locations in South Wales, Birkenhead, Plymouth. In 2009, 2 more, outside the Natural History Museum and in a pub in Southend. None could ever be verified. Then there's the strangest single episode in the whole case. In November 2008, 14 months after Andrew vanished, A man walked into a police station in Leominster, in Herefordshire, and used the station's intercom system to say he had information about Andrew Gosden. Because it was evening, the front desk wasn't staffed, and by the time an officer physically arrived to take his statement, the man was gone. Weeks later, someone claiming to be that same man wrote anonymously to the BBC after the case featured on The One Show, describing a possible sighting of Andrew in Shrewsbury. To this day, nobody knows if it was the same man both times, and if it was, why he didn't simply wait a few more minutes at the station. So here's the question this entire case hinges on. Why London? Why that day? Andrew never told anyone he was going, never packed for an extended trip, and by every account showed no outward sign of planning to leave. Investigators, and Andrew's own family, have spent 19 years working through every possible explanation. Let's go through them. Theory 1. He went sightseeing or to visit family. Andrew genuinely loved London. He had relatives there. His grandmother, aunts, uncles, and the family had visited museums and exhibitions together many times. Early on, this was the leading theory. But it doesn't explain the one-way ticket, the withdrawal of nearly his entire savings, or why he wouldn't have simply told his family he wanted to visit. Theory 2. Work experience. Andrew's older sister, Charlotte, had gone down to London by herself at age 14 to hand out CVs and look for work experience placements. Kevin has speculated Andrew might have been attempting something similar, trying to prove his independence the same way his sister had. It's plausible. It's also unproven. Theory 3. A concert. This is one of the more developed theories, and it connects to Andrew's love of metal music. On the exact night he disappeared, two relevant shows were happening in London. 30 Seconds to Mars played Brixton Academy, and the band Sichthish played what was billed as a farewell show, with their original lineup, at the Carling Academy in Islington, a venue within walking distance of King's Cross. Mick Neville, the retired head of the Metropolitan Police's Central Images Unit, has publicly stated he finds this theory plausible and appealed for anyone who has old photos or video from that gig to come forward, so that specialist analysts, so-called super recognizers, could scan the crowd for Andrew's face. He's also pointed out something else worth noting. Regent's Canal runs close to that venue, and it's unclear whether it was ever properly searched. But, and this matters, there's no confirmed evidence Andrew was actually a fan of either band, or that he had tickets, or that he attended. A third, related lead, the Finnish band HIM, did a promotional signing and invite-only show in Soho a few days later, on September 17th. Andrew's family investigated this lead directly, with the band's own help. It went nowhere. Theory 4. He was struggling with his identity. In November 2009, more than 2 years after Andrew disappeared, Kevin Gosden made a public appeal specifically to the LGBTQ+ community, saying the family had wondered whether Andrew might have been gay or questioning his sexuality, and found it too difficult to bring up at home. Kevin was explicit that this would have made no difference to how the family loved him. It's a theory rooted less in evidence and more in the family's attempt to understand what kind of secret a normally open, communicative household might not have known about. Theory 5. Reinvention. One of Andrew's favorite television shows was The Fall and Rise of Reginald Perrin, a British sitcom about a man who fakes his own death to start an entirely new life. In a 2009 interview, Kevin directly referenced this, asking aloud, "Did he decide to do the Reginald Perrin thing and reinvent himself?" Kevin has said that in his heart, he still believes it was likely a spur-of-the-moment decision, not a long-planned escape, but not a random accident either. Theory 6, and this is the one that gets the most attention in true crime circles. He was taken or lured by someone. Andrew's father has said in interviews that his worst fear is that his son was targeted and taken by a predatory network, what he's referred to as being snatched. Given that Andrew was small for his age, socially inexperienced, and traveling completely alone into one of the largest cities in Europe. This is not an unreasonable fear. But there has never been any confirmed evidence of a specific predator, meeting, or online contact prior to his disappearance. Remember, digital forensics found nothing. There's also a chilling parallel that true crime researchers have pointed out for years. In September 2017, Mick Neville, the same retired Met Police images expert, publicly drew a comparison between Andrew's case and the disappearance of Alex Slowly, another gifted math student, 16 years old, who vanished without a trace in central London less than a year after Andrew, in 2008, apparently on his way toward Islington, just 2 miles from King's Cross. Neville went as far as to publicly raise the question of whether a serial predator might have been operating in the area, targeting academically gifted teenage boys in North London. It's an unproven, unresolved theory, but it's one that professional investigators, not just internet forums, have taken seriously enough to say out loud. Now here's the moment in this case where things get genuinely strange, and it's the detail most viewers who know this case bring up first. Remember the nickname his family called him, Roo? In June 2018, 11 years after Andrew disappeared, the Gosden family revealed that someone had come forward describing an online conversation with a user going by the name Andyroo, based in Lincoln, England, about an hour and a half from Doncaster. This user claimed their boyfriend had left them and that they urgently needed £200 to cover rent. When the person they were talking to offered to actually send the money, Andrew said they couldn't receive it because they didn't have a bank account. And when asked why, they reportedly said it was because they had left home when they were 14. Read that again. A username built from Andrew's family nickname, a reference to needing exactly £200, the precise amount Andrew took out on the morning he disappeared. And a claim of having left home at exactly the age Andrew was. Police did investigate this lead. The person behind the Andyroo account was never identified. Was it Andrew, using a detail from his own life? Was it a cruel hoax by someone who'd read enough news coverage to know his nickname and the exact amount he withdrew? Or was it a coincidence, dressed up by pattern-seeking minds into something more? Nobody, not police, not the family, not the journalists who've covered this case for nearly 2 decades, has ever been able to say for certain. It remains, to this day, unresolved. Now, let's get to December 2021, the moment this case briefly became a very different kind of story. On the 8th of December 2021, South Yorkshire Police detectives arrested 2 men, aged 38 and 45, on suspicion of kidnapping and human trafficking, in direct connection with Andrew's disappearance. It was later revealed the arrests came after an anonymous tip-off, though police didn't disclose that detail publicly until 2023. These were the first arrests made in the case in its entire 14-year history. And there was another layer to it that made the case even more disturbing. The older of the 2 men's arrest was also connected to an investigation into possession of indecent images of children. Numerous electronic devices were seized from both men. Police said the forensic analysis alone could take 6 months to a year. Kevin Gosden released a statement thanking the public for their support and was careful to clarify that the family had no information beyond what police had already made public. They weren't holding anything back from viewers or press because they genuinely didn't know more than anyone else at that point. For over a year, the case sat in limbo. In January 2023, police confirmed the men were still under investigation and the seized devices were still being analyzed. Then, in September 2023, almost 2 full years after the arrests, South Yorkshire Police announced their conclusion. Detectives said they were confident the 2 men arrested played no part in Andrew's disappearance. Kevin and Glenys Gosden thanked police for what they called a comprehensive investigation, but said, in their own words, that they remained living in limbo. That phrase is worth sitting with, because it captures something this case keeps circling back to. An anonymous tip led to the first real arrests in a 14-year-old case. Devices were seized. An entire second, Unrelated concern about child exploitation material surfaced in the process. And after nearly 2 years of forensic work, it all led back to exactly where the family started. Nowhere. The investigation remains open. Detective Chief Inspector Andy Knowles, who led the case, said something at the time that stuck with a lot of people who follow it. It's now been years since Andrew's disappearance, and we know, in that time, people's views, opinions, and loyalties can change. Even the smallest piece of information could help detectives find answers. That's police speak for something very specific, that they believe someone, somewhere, still knows something, and that person's circumstances or relationships may have shifted enough over time that they might finally be willing to talk. So where does that leave us, 19 years later? South Yorkshire Police officially classify this as an open, active investigation, not a cold case. Over the years, they've pursued lines of inquiry that suggest they haven't ruled out the possibility Andrew is still alive. They've cross-checked requests for optical prescriptions, similar to Andrew's, since he wore strong glasses. They've made checks against passport office and national insurance records, and they conduct regular checks against unidentified individuals, John and Jane Does, found in hospitals across the country. In May 2011, the family privately funded a sonar search of the River Thames, using technology typically used to locate objects or remains at sea. Nothing was found. Andrew has a few permanent, identifying physical traits that investigators have said are unlikely to have changed, regardless of age. A distinctive double ridge on his right ear, and he's deaf in his left ear. These are the kinds of details that, even after nearly 2 decades, could still be the thing that identifies him, dead or alive. The family has never changed the locks on their house. Andrew took his key with him the day he left, and as far as his parents are concerned, that door still opens for him. Multiple age progression images have been released over the years, at 16, at 25, most recently around his 30th birthday, attempting to show what Andrew might look like as an adult. The band Muse publicly backed the campaign to find him. In 2017, on the 10th anniversary of his disappearance, the charity Missing People made Andrew the face of their national Find Every Child campaign, putting his image on billboards across the UK. His case has been the subject of BBC Panorama, Crime Watch Live, Loose Women, and multiple true crime podcasts. Every single piece of coverage ends the same way every other piece of coverage on this case has ended for 19 years. No resolution. There's a specific kind of unsolved case that sits differently with people than most true crime stories, and this is one of them. It's not a case with a monster you can picture. There's no clear villain, no dramatic confrontation, no single moment where everything clicks into place. What there is, instead, is a 14-year-old boy who woke up on an ordinary Friday, made a series of small, deliberate choices, the ATM, the change of clothes, the one-way ticket, and then simply stepped out of frame. Every theory in this case is plausible. That's what makes it so difficult. It's plausible he ran, chasing some version of independence or reinvention that went wrong in a way no one could have predicted. It's plausible he was targeted by someone patient enough and careful enough to leave absolutely no trace. It's plausible the truth is something in between, a decision made alone that put him in the path of someone else's decision, made in the dark. What isn't in question is what this has done to his family. 19 years of a house with the locks unchanged. 19 years of a bank account his parents still top up, just in case. 19 years of living in limbo. Their words, not mine. If you have any information, no matter how small, no matter how long ago, no matter who it might involve, South Yorkshire Police and the charity Missing People are still actively taking tips on this case. 19 years on. Somebody out there knows something. It's happened before, in cases exactly like this one, that the person who finally comes forward wasn't hiding a crime. They were just afraid, or confused, or didn't realize what they knew mattered. If that's you, it's not too late. Andrew Gosden was 14 years old. If he's alive today, he's 33. His family is still waiting by that unchanged front door. If this case affected you the way it's affected everyone on our research team, let us know in the comments. And if you want us to keep covering unsolved disappearances like this one, hit subscribe, because we've got more cases like Andrew's coming. We'll see you in the next one.